to, first of all, explain that this video was broadcast in 1960 on UHF television. For those of you who don't know this, most TV was VHF, very high frequency. UHF was a much more local kind of frequency, ultra high frequency, and in 1960, almost no TV sets were capable of receiving UHF. I remember Gary saying that he didn't know if anyone ever was watching this when it was broadcast. Back then there was no videotape either, so the way that they recorded this program was by having a film camera filming it right next to the video camera broadcasting it. And that's what Sue showed you before, was the film canisters, the kinescope. In this book, The Legacy of McLuhan, edited by myself and Ed Wachtel, we have a piece from Gary Gumpert, and I just want to read, and he describes a little bit of what went on, and he writes, I was asked or informed by Lee Dreyfus that I would be directing and producing a 30-minute television program with Marshall McLuhan about his work. The production was being sponsored by the National Association of Educational Broadcasters Project in Understanding Media, and several weeks later, Marshall McLuhan and I were sharing a bottle of scotch in my apartment on the Wayne State University campus. Once his cigar was in hand, planning would begin and last several weeks. Letters and telephone calls between Detroit and Toronto became an obvious necessity. I had begun to panic. My first responsibility was to find out what McLuhan was about, and that was no easy task. I didn't have much else to go on except for the dialogue that evolved over the next few months, correspondence and telephone calls between us, and the script of a previous television program called The Teenager, in which he had been involved with the Canadian Broadcast Company. On May 10, 1960, I received the following letter, and here's what McLuhan's letter said. There is a brutal amount of data to be handled, and I would prefer to have a kinescope that would have to be played over and over, rather than to sacrifice basic aspects of the Gutenberg effect. I will write a complete dialogue for the various shots as soon as you and I have had a chance to go over the script. My theme is quite simple in this respect, at least, that I see the entire Gutenberg 500 years as repetition in all levels of life and culture of the basic matrix of the Gutenberg press itself. The Greco-Roman world, from the phonetic alphabet forward, was in the same way a repetition of the technology of that alphabet as applies to the papyrus, and today our world shows the beginnings of a repetition in all human transactions of the basic electric circuit. I mention this because if we can consider the 500 years of Gutenberg dominance as located between two other technologies, it should help to define our problem. Now, Gary goes on to write, producing and directing this television program was not going to be an easy task. There would never be a complete dialogue for the various shots. What emerged was an outline of images and ideas that would stimulate improv from McLuhan free-flowing associations, translating McLuhan into visual terms, disciplining him to adhere to the limitations of television's time and space without inhibiting his creativity was going to be difficult. Here I was a footnote in graduate study about to produce a television program with someone who suddenly exploded into the foremost media guru of the 1960s. And he writes, on June 4th, 1960, Harley Parker from the Royal Ontario Museum, Robert Shafer, Associate Professor of Education at Wayne State University, Marshall McLuhan, and a television crew got together and we produced a program, the budget of which was $365, which included a $75 directorial fee for myself, plus one negative kinescope and print for $250, adding up to a grand total of $650. The result was the Gutenberg Galaxy, a less than polished but fascinating 30-minute program, one kinescope copy of which today resides in a crevice somewhere in my overgrown study, and the impact of which I am unable to judge. The title of that program would later be the title of a volume published in 1962 by the University of Toronto Press. The question remains open whether Gary was the one who came up with the title Gutenberg Galaxy that McLuhan adopted. I will note, though, the synchronicity between GG, Gary Gumpert, and Gutenberg Galaxy. And without further ado, can we show the film now, please?
The Gutenberg Galaxy, a voyage between two worlds. With Marshall McLuhan for the National Association of Educational Broadcasters, Harley Parker from the Royal Ontario Museum, and Robert Shafer, Associate Professor of Education at Wayne State University.
Today, the globe has shrunk in the wash with speeded up information movement from all directions. We have come, as it were, to live in a global village. Our information comes at high speed, electronic speed, from all quarters. We would seem to be living almost under ear conditions of a small village world. With me, I'm Marshall McLuhan. With me, Bob Shafer and Harley Parker are going to attempt a voyage through the recent centuries, 5 centuries, of Gutenberg culture, the Gutenberg Galaxy. Before us are two utterly incongruous objects, a South Sea mask, representative of primitive culture, pre-literate man, and a TV set, representative of post-literate, electronic man. Between these two extremes exists the Gutenberg Galaxy, 5 centuries of print resulting from thousands of years of phonetic alphabet. And between these two strange objects is sandwiched the Gutenberg Galaxy, through which Bob Shafer, Marshall McLuhan, and Harley Parker are going to attempt a voyage.
How should we begin this voyage? Perhaps to a...
Visit the world of...
We might visit the world of the Eskimos.
Let's discuss our polarities first,
All right.
in terms of this mask at one end and the TV set at the other. And the similarities between them, I think, are really packed with a lot of very interesting material for this program. The fact that the mask is sculptural, and I would believe, or would state, that the TV image is also sculptural, in the sense that it demands from us certain fill-ins of a tactile quality, certain fill-ins for all of our senses, just as the mask lived in a world in which all the senses were simultaneous.
The ear man lived in a world of all the senses.
Exactly.
Information from all quarters and through all senses at once.
All of this is really packaged into the television set today.
But the eye man would seem to have lived in a very abstract dimension of sight, rather than of all the other senses, the way the ear man lived. How did we make the transition from this echoing auditory world of the igloo shape and the bulbous dome? How did we ever get from that ear world to the eye world that we so much take for granted?
Well, the ear world, certainly, to the Eskimo who lives in it, he wouldn't live very many minutes unless he were attuned in such a way with all his senses so that he knew what was going around him all the time simultaneously.
But is this Egyptian scribe one of the key figures in creating the transition from the ear world to the eye world?
Absolutely, because he is dealing in hieroglyphs, pictorial messages, as it were.
In the same way that the medieval scribe.
The medieval scribe simply carried on his world of the visual, the phonetic structure, the Egyptian, the Greek culture.
Translation of sound into sight, really, isn't it? Because the stylus on the clay tablet and the quill on the scroll are ways of getting sound into sight.
That is really the crucial point, really, at the point where the man makes a squiggle and it is a sound. This is the crucial point.
This is
A tremendous technology which enabled them to translate all the other ear cultures into their own visual culture.
And to control them.
Something going on at the present time in China. We're still translating Chinese auditory culture into our phonetic alphabet.
Well, I know a Japanese editor who told me the story of production on a Japanese newspaper in which they deal with 41 phonetic symbols and 20,000 Chinese ideograms. I asked him how they could possibly produce a newspaper under such conditions, and he told me that they did it with a staff perhaps 35 times as big as our own newspaper staffs. One man, for instance, will have maybe 500 or 1,000 of these little wooden blocks on which the ideogram is engraved, and if somebody wants woman washing pot, the appropriate man comes up with a little ideogram for that particular thing.
They are undergoing a transition from the older ear world to the eye world by this means.
Right.
And they have not yet, though, mastered this Gutenberg technology.
But here we have a thing that is very, very different indeed from the Japanese or the Chinese 20,000 ideograms. Here we have replaceable units, uniform parts, put together, make words, millions of words in a variety of languages. We put them together in a way that has parallels to our assembly line systems, and it's lineal along a line of words.
It ended the handicraft world, set up the mechanical world.
Absolutely, just as the
alphabets. We see
created a
transcend
totally
this
new
way.
world of producer-consumer relationships.
And it gave us a kind of assembly line, which we see unfolding before us here with the alphabet.
And we're going to have, we move at that point into the world of numbers. There are parallels with the world of numbers, which are also movable in the same.
The mechanization was by means of the segmenting of the old handicraft motions and actions.
And we will see this now on the McLuhan arithmetic film.
The same sort of thing extended to number.
The same sort of thing, the assembly line, repeatability idea in terms of number.
How did the Gutenberg thing, though, bring about that strange Renaissance fact of individualism and nationalism? You can see how print would create an individual person, inner-directed, a kind of person, highly self-centered and very much self-analytical. Well, one of the most fascinating sides of the Renaissance was the way in which it took its print culture as a kind of system of aesthetics.
Oh yes, the Leonardo da Vinci, as a matter of fact, was the type of man who could move from a work of art to a siege gun. He was capable of seeing the aesthetics of all mechanical production and working with them.
How did that really work? I'm not really clear. We've talked about the aesthetics of mechanics. What did da Vinci do?
Well, he moved through a variety of fields of, as I suggested, siege guns.
Wave theory analysis?
Wave theory analysis. Matter of fact, yes, wave theory analysis was a very important one.
And what about self-expression? That whole effort at self-portraiture and self-analysis, and the whole drive toward self-expression and self-investigation.
Well, this was characteristic of the Renaissance.
Well,
really
portraiture of a unique individual is typically Renaissance. Very few portraits before.
Self-portraits.
Even portraits of any kind, really.
I see.
Individualized portraits.
It's strange that that print technology should have fostered this habit of self-expression and self-analysis.
Here in this Rembrandt, we have a picture which is Rembrandt looking into a mirror and painting himself in the mirror. You get the visual echo effect, as it were.
Perhaps the same kind of echo effect that we could see in the infinity sign.
And that perhaps we associate with the old Aunt Jemima type of advertisement.
Right. The picture within a picture within a picture, so on into
Repeated
infinity.
and converging on zero.
I don't know whether you know this old ad. This was one in which Aunt Jemima held a package showing a picture of Aunt Jemima holding a package and so on. Right into the infinite series once
This
more.
is the perfect expression, isn't it, of a uniform, repeatable type converging upon zero.
That's it.
Infinity.
We're saying here that the infinity sign, as we know it, was really impossible before print. It really didn't happen before Gutenberg.
The sonneteers were very much concerned with that same form of repetition. Shakespeare's "like as the waves make toward the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end. Each changing place with that which goes before, in sequent toil all forward do contend." This concern with time as segmented, as well as space as segmented, is seemingly an exact repeat of the pattern of the Gutenberg types.
And an exact antithesis to the earlier world of simultaneity, lack of line.
Yes, that tie-in between self-expression, self-analysis, point of view, perspective, an amazing complex there of formal overlay.
And
this sonnet, against death and all oblivious enmity shall you pace forth. Your praise shall find room even in the eyes of all posterity, that wear the world out to the ending do. This idea is related, is it not? The idea of achieving a sort of earthly eternity by repetition and extension of the self.
I think that this is only possible with print. I mean, you find its parallel in the Rembrandt portrait. Posterity, these things have made Rembrandt live.
There's another use of the same form in Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. Shakespeare seems to have been obsessed with the aesthetics of print in a way quite different from Leonardo. But we're more familiar with this repeat, uniform, receding form into infinity in the case of telephone poles, aren't we?
In space,
railway tracks?
in space rather
Well,
than...
this looks like the Trans-Siberian Railroad that we used to see in our geography books, which carries on the idea of a recession into infinity.
Well, this is the exact visual equivalent of tomorrow and tomorrow and
Right.
tomorrow.
Right.
The exact
A
equivalent.
segmenting of space here and time.
Well, with the Gutenberg achievement of mechanization of handicraft, we seem to have moved almost in the same way into a kind of world such as the Egyptians thought of in connection with the god Thoth.
Oh, yes.
I understand and remember the story of Thoth, who was the god of writing, who was believed by the Egyptians to also to have been the instigator of all the sciences and all the other arts.
Well, weren't we saying really that the Gutenberg effect was to pattern in new form all the arts and sciences, mathematics,
Same thing.
physics, and as well as painting, poetry,
Thoth and Gutenberg.
changing the concepts of time, the concepts of space of an entire age, an entire culture?
The idea of a repeatable experiment is important here, isn't it? That you can have a scientific experiment which you can repeat over and over
It
again.
is scientific if you can repeat it.
If you can repeat it. It is
Again, Jemima.
right.
Same thing.
These infinity signs are present in our culture in a variety
One
of
tremendous
ways,
consequence,
places.
of course, of Gutenberg as compared with the manuscript was the speed up of information movement, wasn't it? With exactly uniform materials that could be distributed from a central source, you could move by roads, and roads were soon built to carry this uniform material. You could move anywhere. You could organize whole communities at a distance.
And we could have what we might call homogeneity of citizenship.
By similar training and uniform educational patterns, you could create a kind of manpower pool of almost uniform, irreplaceable parts, replaceable parts.
Right. If you can mass-produce print in the vernacular of a particular country, you can give everyone the same thing to read in that country at the same time. You can do this very quickly.
And you create barriers. You create the boundaries of that nation at the same time as you do this.
As soon as they could see their own language in print form, they began to develop a sense of national unity.
Quite.
Also of national markets. This is a tremendous leap, isn't it, from that Egyptian scribe world of merely translating ear into eye. Here you have eye taking over totally the organization of all knowledge,
well, publication is possible here for the first time, perhaps, in a mass way.
By
quite
repetition?
a different thing.
By
Repetition.
By repetition, you could publish yourself anywhere.
Quite a different matter than the scribe with his manuscript, who could, by his way of publishing, would be to read his manuscript out loud to probably no more than 30 people at a time.
This was publication for Chaucer.
This was publication for Chaucer, and we immediately, as soon as print became mass-produced.
It wouldn't have given him a very grandiose idea of himself, would it, if publication only consisted in reaching a few dozen people? The print man must have felt an enormous extension and growth of his ego by means of print. He must have felt a tremendous access of power, that his image could be multiplied in so many times in exactly uniform pattern for so many unseen people. This must have created a vast dimension of Renaissance megalomania.
Well, quite. I mean, the whole idea at that point of his fame lasting forever, of course, as you mentioned, is so much a part of that.
Well, this was true of the Renaissance man in many ways, his exploration and his colonization and his view of the world, his idea of
It's no
conquest.
accident that Columbus and print coincided.
And these things were thought to be permanent. So the idea of establishment of an empire was a permanent structure.
Also offered tremendous incentives to self-expression and publication. Whereas formerly people had relatively little incentive to become egotistically projected onto a whole civilization.
Well, what we've been saying here really is that print, in the advent of the Gutenberg era, had a rather tremendous effect upon human sensibility and perception in some of the ways that we have seen.
I suppose that today, with the speed up of information by electronic means, we're in an even greater revolution than the Gutenberg thing produced in the Renaissance.
Only we're going in the opposite direction, perhaps, aren't we?
You'd think that perhaps we're driving back toward the ear world from which the Egyptian scribe translated us.
So this is, I think, the message of our television set and our primitive mask.
Sure. Apparent in our contemporary art.
Many people would regard this as pessimistic view of development, wouldn't they, of just retrograde metamorphosis.
Well, we don't mean here that print is going to vanish at all, do we? That
No, we certainly don't mean that. We mean that there occurs a different ratio of the senses. After all, man lives by extending his sensibilities into the world and understanding it in that way. During a Gutenberg period, you had almost complete eye orientation. Now we are moving back to perhaps what I might think would be a better relationship.
Let's consider a little more closely for a moment the effects on organizing of society of the Gutenberg thing. That is, for example, if you have these uniform, repeatable means of delivering messages, you also have a uniform, repeatable method of training citizens. You can then begin to develop a homogeneity, a sameness in the society, which gives you access to tremendous power.
The teaching of reading becomes a standardized thing. What the reader reads is standardized. The print mechanism, the whole print mechanism is standardized. So this means that the perceptions that an individual reader has
and as Shakespeare stressed, it creates the idea not only all forwards do contend, it's a one-way flow of upward and onward, driving toward self-expression, self-realization, inner direction, self-initiative, all these forms of competitive life based on uniformity and repeatability. And line. That's a point we haven't made much of. The Gutenberg line. The
idea of lineality.
The sequential, the rigorous precision line.
Well, this is the way we learn to read. We learn to read.
At that point with the Rose of Castile.
That pun on the opera, the ear, and the ROWS,
yes, quite.
The railway line.
That's right, the opera and the railroad line and the
eye
long
and the
lines
ear.
of type.
To get the logic of a paragraph, to read for the main idea of a paragraph.
And to get the man's point of view, a fixed point of view.
But this is implicit here, isn't it?
This pattern has obviously given the Western world tremendous power of organization.
Yes, as in the sense of an army, for example. The uniform parts of an army as we see here in our soldiers.
Well, I've been told that in the case of Napoleon that in order to train his men in sufficient precision and accuracy, he used to tie their feet together 18 inches apart so that he could have uniform marching lines, firing lines, complete power over his soldiers.
Actually, let's take a look at these soldiers. They are very much uniform entities in themselves. Each is uniformly dressed. Each has a uniform posture. Each carries a weapon which is uniform. They are certainly replaceable and quite subject to change and standardization. And then the uniformity extends to other...
right in front of us now. The men are breaking their step because they're marching over a pontoon bridge. But without these forms of organization, we would hardly recognize our world today.
It struck me that Bob said almost exactly the same thing about those soldiers that I said about the tight cons, you know. It's almost exactly
That's right. They
the repeatable, uniform parts which can be placed in a variety of ways to make a variety of meaning.
Mobile types like mobile units, squads.
Mobile soldiers.
And this uniformity exists in many, many places in our societies. We walk about.
This is the point, isn't it, that
our daily lives.
aren't we trying to make the point really that these methods, these techniques of communication do formulate our modes of thinking, our ways of thinking, so that it becomes pervasive, and everything we attack in a certain way, which is the result of this technology.
So that seeing these uniform modes in a variety of places, in a variety of ways, is so much a part of our common everyday world that we think little about it or how it got that way.
Very few people have looked at it.
We associate with the classroom, with the seating plan, the grid system.
Yes, the grid system, a teacher and a class with seats bolted to the floor, is a very good example of this idea of uniform parts, interchangeable parts.
Children all studying the same subject at the same time.
I'd like to point out visually it's exactly the counterpart of the book page, too, with the teacher as the heading on top and the lines underneath.
The movable types being the students?
Well, they're not particularly movable. The students are slightly movable, the desk's immovable.
I wonder whether the rebellion of children today in classrooms and against the book has anything to do with the new electronic age we live in.
I think very definitely. I think that the patterns that we begin to see developing in schoolrooms, which are different.
Or the breaking down of patterns in
into a more organic forms.
Children working in small groups, working on different projects, doing different things at different times.
Round table elements.
More dialogue, more discussion, instead of a one-way flow of information.
I would think that this breakup of the grid system in the classroom may be leading us to the breakup of uniformity in other aspects of our society as we move along perhaps to different kinds of patterns.
We used to ask, what's your line? Or what line of work are you in?
Train of thought.
Do you follow me? Or I don't follow you, meaning I don't get anything at all from what you're saying. The line the broken line of your discourse provides me with nothing.
The whole progressive education movement, we might even say, was a kind of rebellion against lineality. And grid.
But that's been going on for a long time. The Romantic poets were violently opposed to it too, just as much as Rousseau. But this world, this same lineal structure of narrative has appeared in our novels, our movies. It's in almost every form of organized experience we're accustomed to deal with.
The interesting thing is that these things change never takes place completely and arbitrarily. We have several modes of present simultaneously. We still have classrooms with desks bolted to the door, and we have to the floor, and we have classrooms where they're not. And we have uniformity present in a variety of ways in our society, and we have many places where uniformity is breaking up.
But there is no danger of uniformity breaking down for a while in these areas of assembly line production we associate with the motor industry.
Well, the parking lot, I'm sure, will be with us for a long time.
The uniform products.
There's a type case, but with cans of soup.
Fixed prices, uniform commodities, replaceable parts.
The whole idea of the supermarket is perhaps in itself a temple of uniformity in many ways, as is the assembly line.
But yes, the assembly line is the classic type of it.
Into infinity, production.
Tanks a million.
Tanks a million.
One can imagine an assembly line going into infinity, perhaps.
But look what is about to happen. Automation, tapes, synchronized information coming from numerous directions all at once. Very much like our global village, in which the single line or structure seems to yield to a non-lineal complex.
We're right back to our Eskimo, as a matter of fact.
Back to the primitive world, back to the ear world, many directions at once.
And we still have a transitional feature, the typewriter, the electric typewriter.
Those keys are so strikingly reminiscent of the McLaren number arithmetic that, and yet here is a handicraft world. Here's the Gutenberg thing carried all the way to the point where it returns toward the old handicraft pattern of do-it-yourself. The McLaren translation of the Gutenberg thing into numbered terms reminds us perhaps that modern math, higher math and physics, have been engaged in translating the old visual space, eye space, back into the space of touch and movement and of hearing. That the whole...
Is this why it's said that the Chinese and the Japanese are make better physicists and mathematicians?
Even the Russians. They play it by ear. They don't try to visualize these relationships in the world of nuclear physics.
They aren't looking for a single line to pursue.
They're not looking for a line because it isn't there.
I think, Marshall, we missed possibly the idea that McLaren film reminded me that the film, too, is sequential in exactly the same way.
As the Gutenberg line.
The Gutenberg line.
You do it by, you make a film by still shots on a line, on a piece of celluloid.
Put them together and you have the whole.
And then you can, but when you, notice, when you put the film together, you reconstruct the world of free movement of the old handicraft world. You don't break it up, by breaking it up into statics and film, you merely move into the world of freewheeling motion again. This is a kind of return like the typewriter, do-it-yourselfness.
So we have these modes present at the same time in society, don't we? We have the new electronic modes, which are perhaps like our television set, pushing us into the tactile world. We still have
back to the primitive mouse, so that we have perhaps made some indication of why these strangely ill-assorted objects here, the mask and the television set, have some congruity after all.
We have a great deal of trouble sometimes living in a world where these modes are present simultaneously.
In terms of education, this is a tremendous problem, really, the transition between the two worlds. In fact, they both coexist.
What are some of the things we can do, I wonder, to perhaps live in a world where the world of Gutenberg is
the problems of living in a global village while making a transition from one vast embracing technology to another would seem to call for the utmost attention, offering the utmost challenge to human understanding. This entire global village that we see before us suggests that we are moving into, educationally, into a set of challenges and opportunities which are quite fantastic. Whether people are prepared to meet these things or not, I don't know, but I think that we're doing something about it right here. I think that our global village is a theme which might well sign off this program. And after our little voyage through 5 centuries of print culture, thank you.
The Gutenberg Galaxy, a voyage between two worlds. Your guides on this voyage have been Marshall McLuhan for the National Association of Educational Broadcasters, Harley Parker from the Royal Ontario Museum, and Robert Shafer, Associate Professor of Education at Wayne State University. This program was directed by Gary Gumpert, Assistant Director Gary Witt, and was made possible by the National Association of Educational Broadcasters, the United States Office of Education, and by the Teacher Education Project, College of Education at Wayne State University. Research by Arthur Knowles of the University of Toronto. This has been a Wayne State University production.
Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien.